from Matthew 5, verses 1 through 12. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Amen. And you may be seated. And if you would, once again, join me in prayer. Father, during this time, I ask that you come and soften our hearts and open our ears to your words. And I ask that you allow the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart to be pleasing and acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. So who here would like to be blessed by God? Okay. I know we're white, but you can say amen or yes. So who here would like to be blessed by God? There you go. Good job. That's more like it. I think all of us at some point in our lives would like to be God blessed, right? And that's what politicians are famous for, saying, "I'm not a Kuwait." No, that's not what politicians are famous for saying. Everything they finish is, "God bless America," right? And we want our nation to be blessed, we want ourselves to be blessed, we want our families to be blessed, and sometimes we even want our neighbors to be blessed, right? Sometimes. I think all too often when we think about God's blessing our lives, what we're thinking about is us getting what we want. We think maybe about the prayer of Jabez. It's in 1 Chronicles chapter 7, and Jabez prays that God would increase his territory. And so we think if God's going to bless me, he's going to increase what is going on in my life. So maybe God's going to increase my finances, or God's going to increase my looks, or God's going to increase my job, right? You can pray for so much, but God can only do so many things. And we're praying that God will bless us and that we will increase, whatever your territory is. And a lot of times we think when we want God to bless us, that's what we're looking for, right? Any of y'all feel that way? No, y'all are not selfish like I am. Last year, or in October of 2017, I was still living in Lubbock, and I was invited by a friend to a pastor's appreciation meal. And I felt like I was obligated to go. It was a person I knew pretty well, and she basically begged me to come and then texted me 30 minutes before and said, "Get over here." And so I showed up a few minutes early like I always do, and there was this banquet hall for this business, and I'm not going to say which business in Lubbock it is, because if you're from Lubbock, you know who it would be. And it was seated for 50, and I was the first pastor to walk through the doors, and I was like, that's a little awkward when you go into this huge room and you're all by yourself. And it got a little less awkward because there were like 3 other pastors that showed up, I don't know. And when we got there, the business owner, he was too busy to be there to start, and he rushed in, and he talked about how he wasn't like the best Christian in the world. He didn't go to church, and he didn't really do much. But it was obvious that God was with him because his business was growing rapidly. In fact, he was like, obviously God has blessed me because I have had for the last 3 years in a row one of the top 500 nation's fastest growing businesses here in Lubbock, Texas. And everybody was like, oh yay, way to go, God's blessing you, right? That's so great. His business has since imploded because of poor business practices. And so I wonder if he still feels that God has blessed him in that business. I think all too often we think that God's blessing is just that good things raining down on us. When in reality, I think Jesus has something different to teach us. And it was really hard for me at that point because I was pastoring a struggling church plant that was about to fail and close. And so here I'm like, here's this guy who is not living the Christian life. And here's me who is seeking after God, and God seems to be blessing him, and like he's pouring out his curses on me, is how I felt. Then I had to remind myself, I'm not an Old Testament guy. Like, we live in the New Testament. God doesn't punish us when we do bad things and bless us when we do good. Jesus actually said it rains on the just and unjust alike. So if things are going good in your life right now, you could still be living a horrible lifestyle. And if things are going horrible in your lifestyle, you could be seeking Christ with all that you have. And so I think for us to really understand what Jesus is talking about, what the Bible is talking about when we are blessed, then we have to see what Jesus says. And so if you would, you have your Bibles with you, have a phone with you, I want you to pull it out and go to Matthew chapter 5. And I'm going to be teaching this morning, and I'll be honest, there are lots of Beatitudes that I'll be talking about, and each one of them could be a sermon in itself, so I'm going to be doing a brief overview of each Beatitude. I'm not going to be diving super deep into them. And so just bear with me, because I'm going to be teaching you a little bit more, and then maybe I'll preach at the end of it. We'll see. So I'm going to start off by reading the first couple of verses. This is verse 1 and 2. Seeing the crowds, he being Jesus, went up on the mountain. And when he sat down, his disciples came to him. And he opened his mouth and he taught them, saying, verse 3. Right away, we see that there is a differentiation in Jesus and who's around Jesus right now. There are two different groups of people that are listed. There are the crowds, and there are the disciples. And they're not listed as the same group. I want you to notice that. A lot of times when the crowds are surrounding Jesus, it's not just like Jesus slowly walking through the wilderness and a few people off in the distance. No, the Gospels tell us that when the crowds would come to Jesus, they would press around him, because this was the guy that was healing the sick, making the blind see, feeding 5,000 people at one time. I don't know about y'all, I've never seen that happen, but that'd be pretty crazy, right? And they wanted to see this, and they wanted to get close to him, they wanted to touch him, and they wanted to be healed by him. And so they were pressing around him, and so he went up on the mountain. And the crowds stayed where they were at. But the disciples went with Jesus. The disciples were the learners of Jesus. They were the people that followed him no matter what. And the crowds, they were the people that kind of stayed behind just to hear what he had to say. Makes me wonder, if I had to ask you this morning, if you were a disciple of Jesus, are you a disciple, a learner of Jesus that goes with him at all times and all places? Or are you content to be further down the mountain just with the mass crowds? But the great news of this story is Jesus doesn't turn around and just get his holy huddle of disciples together and say, hey guys, let me tell you some good news. He turns to the masses and he says, this is for everybody. So it doesn't matter if you're in the crowd this morning, it doesn't matter if you're a disciple. Jesus wants you to know what it means to have a blessed life, because we'd like to be blessed, right? Okay. Just making sure you're there. So he said, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. What a way to start off. These parables, these Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount is also told in Luke chapter 6. And Luke chapter 6 phrases this a little bit differently, and I want to look at both of them. Luke says, blessed are the poor. Matthew says, blessed are the poor in spirit. And there's a difference between the two. Poor in spirit is talking about spiritual poverty, how we realize that we are hungry and thirsty for God, and we are completely and utterly dependent upon him. And poor means you ain't got no money. And if you're sitting in this room right now, I can almost guarantee you, you are not poor. Right? You were born in America. If you had breakfast this morning, and if you look forward to having lunch in about 30 minutes, you're not poor. You're a pastor. One of the things that I like to do is there's this thing that's called the Global Wealth Indicator, and it'll tell you where you rank in the global scale of things. Me, working for a church, and my wife, who works for the state, right? We have two very prestigious jobs. Yeah. We are ranked in the upper 98th percentile of the world for wealth with our salaries. We're rich. compared to most of the rest of the world. And what Jesus is saying is that if you come to me and you're rich, what it means is if we put our faith and hope in our worldly possessions, if we trust that my money or my bank account is going to save me one day, or my 401k in the future is going to bail me out of a bad time, then we're not putting our trust in God, and we have this worldly wealth but a spiritual poorness. And if we have this spiritual wealth, because some of us, God has gifted with some amazing gifts, right? Some of y'all are very gifted people, and you've used your gifts to glorify God. And what happens, I think, the older that we get sometimes, at least the older that I get, I can't speak for y'all, but we think, man, God has given me this gift, and I'm talented, and I can use it for His glory. And then pretty soon it's just like, I'm gifted, and I'm talented, and I've got money in the bank, and I'm good, and we don't need Him anymore. And we fall into that trap of, I have everything that I need. And so Jesus says, if you want to be blessed, you have to realize that you're poor. That you're poor financially, that you're poor spiritually, that we need Him to be dependent upon. That we need to go after Him with all that we have. In fact, it continues to go on like that. He says, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. And somebody in here has lost somebody they love, right? You've lost a mom, a dad, a grandparent, a brother, a sister, a child. And what he's saying is that when you mourn, when you grieve, that Christ will come and comfort you. But it's not just this physical mourning that he's talking about. He's also talking about mourning for our society, being disenfranchised with the state of our world today. It breaks my heart when my kids, they're 8 and 10, they come to me and they say, Dad, we're just ready for Jesus to come back because the world's so bad. They realize that Jesus' prayer, the prayer that we just prayed, that the kingdom of God has not come on earth as it is in heaven. And they mourn for that day to come. And to me, I think that's part of what this mourning is. It's not just mourning for the loved ones, but it's mourning for the world and the way that it should be and the way that it really is. It's mourning that God isn't revealing His power as quickly as I want Him to. The early church fathers and mothers, they wrote about the mourning in a different sense. They wrote about mourning should be for our sin. Just think about it. Think about the last time you messed up, majorly or smallly, in God's eyes. And I have to go back to like Friday for like the big one. It's true, I was like totally selfish and mad at my spouse because she didn't do what I wanted her to do. And it was her, no, it wasn't her birthday. Her birthday happened before. So anyway, right? And what they're saying is that when we realize the sin that is in our life, if we can mourn for that, if we can realize that it's wrong, if we can realize that it alienates us from God and alienates us from people, then we will be blessed. And they take it a step further and they say, not only should we mourn for our own sins, but we should also mourn for the sins of others. Not me sitting up here and being like, hey, look at Ed McLeod, he's such a sinner, bad Ed, right? Such a good sinner. Good job. But it's me seeing the things that are going on that could be better if sin wasn't there. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Meek does not mean weak. A lot of times when we think of meek in our society, we think of this quiet, gentle, humble person that just walks in and is like, how's everybody today? Where do you want to go to lunch at? Oh, I really wanted to go eat Chinese food, but I guess we'll go eat Mexican food. Show me what you want to do. Right? I'm so meek and humble. It's Numbers chapter 12, verse 3 tells us that Moses was one of the meekest people on earth. Moses, the guy that saw God in the burning bush, the guy that marched up to Pharaoh not once or twice or 3 times, but 10 times and said, let my people go. Except Moses wasn't Charlton Heston, and the whole reason he didn't want to speak to Pharaoh is because he was a stutterer. So next time you see the 10 Commandment movie, instead of thinking, let my people go, think, go. I think after 10 times, anybody would be ready to let people go after that, right? Moses, man who took his rod and split the Red Sea. Moses the man that led the Israelites into the wilderness out of Egypt. Moses the man that went to Sinai and got the 10 Commandments. Moses was not a man that was just pushed around and walked on, but he was a man that was meek. And the meaning for that word meek actually means somebody that is fully and totally dependent upon God. Being meek means that we need to put our full and total dependence upon Him. That we need to be gentle, yes, but also loving and seeking after Him. We have to realize that being meek means that we are quick to forgive and slow to anger. And that we should be people that overcome evil with good. For blessed are the meek. He continues on and says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. What he's saying is, what do you hunger for? I'm going to do a quick survey, and I'd be shocked if any of y'all know this person, but does anybody know Florence and the Machine? Jason still does. Yes, I have some other people that are my age. Way to go, guys. She is an artist, a singer, and one of her newest songs says, we all have a hunger. I mean, I was actually playing on the way to church this morning. I mean, it's so catchy. And it makes me realize that we're all hungry for something, right? You may be hungry for lunch now and wondering when I'm going to be quiet. Or you may be hungry for your sports team to win, or for your kids to do good in life, or for your bank account to be a little bit better. But we all hunger for something. And what Jesus is saying is, blessed are those that hunger and thirst, not for things of this world, but for what? For righteousness. People that are longing after God with all that they have and all that they are. And He says they will be the ones that are full. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. These are people that have compassion. Jesus, every single time in the gospel, this gets me, every single time in the gospel that it says that Jesus had compassion, He turned around and He did something about it. You see, He would feel this feeling in His gut. He would see people that were hungry. He turned around and He would heal them. He would see people that were blind. He would have compassion. He would go and heal them. He saw his friend Lazarus that was dead. He had compassion and He went and raised him from the dead. Because compassion without action is just pity. And God does not call us to be a pitiful people. But He calls us to be a people that bring His mercy and His compassion to others. It means that we take upon the sin and the humiliation of others, that we long to go to those that are downtrodden, those that are of low estate, those that are weak and forlorn, and we help provide for them because we realize that God has provided so much for us. We become bearers of God's mercy to all of those in the world. And we realize that one day that Christ will show us mercy on that final judgment seat. He continues on and says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. When I think pure in heart, I think Adam in the garden before the fall. Having a childlike faith, a complete and utter dependent and good relationship with God. People that realize that we need to be personally pious. That somebody joked and said, I told them this is my piety outfit, because I'm normally in khakis, right? We need to be people that seek after God, that are going to Him with all that we have. We long for Him to change our heart. When we're mourning over our sins and the sins of others, what God does is He starts to change who we are. And the things that I struggled with 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I don't struggle with as much as because God is slowly making me a little bit purer and a little bit purer. And my prayer and my cry for my whole life has been not so that people would see me in all of my glory, but that I would decrease and Christ would increase. And people would see the pure of heart that hopefully I have. And He says when we do it, that's when we will see God. That's when we will experience Him. He continues on, He said, blessed are the peacemakers, for the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons and daughters of God. It's hard to be a peacemaker if you don't have peace yourself. If you don't know the peace of Christ that surpasses all knowledge and understanding. It's hard to be a peacemaker if you have inner turmoil and strife going on. But what Christ is saying is, not only do I come to give you peace, But I want y'all to do, what I want all y'all to do, is I want y'all to be the people in the world that make peace for this world. That means that you go to people that are in the midst of strife and bring about reconciliation. Now think about this. Every single one of our last presidents, every single president that I can remember, has been a Christian. Right? So, Donald Trump says he's a Christian. Barack Obama said he's a Christian. Hillary Clinton, when she was running, said she was a Christian. The Bushes said they were Christians. Bill Clinton said he was a Christian. Now, if they took this one seriously, blessed are the peacemakers. Think about how our world would change. Instead of blessed are those that make war. I'll just leave that political statement there. We are called to bring peace and unity. We are called to be people of reconciliation. We are called to renounce violence and ill will towards others so that others can experience the peace of Christ here and now. And Jesus finishes up by saying this, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you." I haven't really ever been persecuted. I live in America, for crying out loud, where I can say what I want to. And as far as I know, none of y'all are secret CIA agents waiting for me to say the wrong thing to arrest me, right? If you are, would you tell me later? We live in a land where we are free to worship how we want to. But we also live in a landscape that is changing, where people that proclaim the gospel are being called heretics and judgmental and give them hate speech. And it just makes me wonder, if we continue down this path, if Christians are persecuted, how will the church respond? One of my favorite professors at Asbury, Timothy Tennant, the president of the seminary, said, "The church survives best on the fringes of society," meaning that as we are persecuted, we will rise up. And I just wonder, if that day arises, will we be blessed for suffering with Christ? One of my spiritual mentors, a man named Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Any of y'all ever heard of Bonhoeffer before? I got some pastors in here that better have heard of him. He was born into a middle-class family in Germany at the turn of the 20th century, so the very beginning of the 1900s. Now, his middle-class lifestyle was this. He had 2 different houses that he lived in. He had a butler and a chauffeur. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I would consider myself a middle-class person, and I don't have a butler or a chauffeur. If anybody would like to volunteer, see me after the service. I'm more than happy to. His dad was the chair of the psychology department at the University of Berlin in the teens and 20s and 30s as Hitler was rising to power. Bonhoeffer was called to ministry in this time, and he quickly realized that this young, charismatic man named Hitler wasn't all that the people thought he was to be. You see, because Hitler, what he wanted to do is he wanted to restore the German state, and he wanted to make Germany great. He wanted to make Germany like it was before World War I happened, and they signed the Treaty of Versailles. And Bonhoeffer saw that there was something a little bit odd about him, and he started realizing, hey, there is worshiping Jesus, and there is worshiping our country, and these two are not the same thing. And when Bonhoeffer started arresting the Jews, or when Hitler started arresting the Jews, Bonhoeffer was one of the very first people to say, this isn't good. We need to stand against him. He started what was called the Confessing Church. When Bonhoeffer was in the midst of World War II, preaching against Hitler and preaching against the atrocities of the Nazis, saving the Jews, he actually left the country for his own sake. He was a man that actually tried to kill Hitler on 3 different occasions. He was a part of a conspiracy. We can talk to me more about that later. It's fascinating. And he fled to America in the depths of World War II, fleeing for his own life. And once he got here, he realized that he wasn't home. He wasn't leading the church like he needed to be. So he left America and went back to Germany. Before this time, and as this was happening, he finished up his book called The Cost of Discipleship, a book that talks about the Sermon on the Mount, a book that I used to help prepare for this sermon. He went back into the lion's den. Bonhoeffer actually believed that these Beatitudes were progression, meaning that the easier ones are at the beginning. So it's easier for you to be poor in spirit, to realize that we need God. It's easier for us to mourn. It's easier for us to be meek. A little bit harder for us to hunger and thirst for righteousness. A little bit harder for us to be merciful. A little bit harder for us to be pure in heart. A lot harder for us to be peacemakers, and extremely difficult for us to be persecuted. 6 months before the war was over, or a little bit more than that, Bonhoeffer was arrested in prison, thinking that he'd quickly escape because he had all the right connections in all the right places. 2 weeks before the war was over, he was one of the last martyrs of the faith. He was a man that was persecuted because of his beliefs. He was a man that realized that this world may have everything to offer, but in the end it has nothing. And he wanted to be blessed by God, so he was led by Christ back into the lion's den, back to give his life so that he could help bring about people and the gospel to those that needed it. Makes me wonder this morning, if we really want to be blessed, what are we willing to give up? What are we willing to sacrifice so that we can draw closer to God? Because this is what he's telling us, is that if we want to be blessed, then we need to draw closer to him. And he may not give us what we want, but he'll give us what we need. And ultimately, to be a blessed person, we need to be a people that are persecuted. Because our God is a God that took his persecution. He took his body and had it broken. It took his blood and had it shed for you. And it was because of the persecution of Christ that we realize what it means to be a blessed people. And so if you would, join me on page 12 of your hymnal. And we'll go through the order of communion.